What if the most dangerous place on Earth right now is not a battlefield or a border, but a single mountain in the Iranian desert that no inspector has ever been allowed to enter? Somewhere under that rock, deeper than most skyscrapers are tall, Iran carved out something so well protected that the most powerful non-nuclear bomb ever built may not be able to reach it. And the only reason the world knows it exists is that a few satellites happen to be looking down at the right moment. Before we go inside that mountain, do one small thing. Tap the like button because it decides whether this video reaches 10,000 people or 10 times that. Hit subscribe because this story is not over and there will be more chapters. And if you know someone who keeps saying nothing's really happening with Iran, send this to them. By the end, they will understand exactly what happened and why it is far bigger than the headlines made it look. Let us start with the land, because the land matters here. Drive south from the Iranian city of Kashan and the world flattens into a dry, pale plain. This is central Iran in Isfahan province. Out on that plain sits Natanz, the country's best-known uranium enrichment complex. Natanz has been photographed, sanctioned, sabotaged, and bombed for over 20 years. Almost everyone who follows this subject knows the name. But Natanz is not the story anymore. About a mile and a half to the south, the flat ground rises into a low, rugged ridge. Locals call it Ku Ekolangazla. Translated loosely, it means something like Pickaxe Mountain. That is where the nickname came from, the one that has now traveled around the world. Pickaxe Mountain. It sounds almost harmless. It is attached to what may be the most consequential construction project of the past 10 years. For years, that ridge was just rock. Then, around 2020, analysts studying commercial satellite images noticed movement, trucks, new access roads cut across empty desert, then excavation, then, unmistakably, tunnel mouths being carved straight into the base of the hill. The Institute for Science and International Security, led by the former Weapons Inspector David Albright, published image after image, month after month. The digging never stopped. What they documented was not a small hole. Multiple tunnel entrances were identified, reported as 4, roughly 2 on each side of the ridge. Each opening was large, with estimates of about 6 meters wide and 8 meters tall. Wide enough for heavy trucks, wide enough for cargo, wide enough for the kind of industrial equipment you would need if you planned to install and run something serious underground. Then there was the spoil. Whenever you dig a tunnel, you have to put the broken rock somewhere, and that waste rock is one of the few honest things in this business. It does not lie. Analysts measured the growing spoil piles and used them to estimate how much material had been pulled out of the mountain. The numbers kept climbing, hundreds of thousands of cubic meters. Estimates of the underground space ran into the tens of thousands of square meters. In plain language, this was not a bunker. It was a complex with real halls and real corridors. But the number that made militaries sit up was the depth. Based on the height of the ridge and the angle of the digging, analysts estimated the deepest sections may sit around 80 to 100 meters below the surface. Some assessments went higher. Compare that with Fordo, the enrichment site buried near Qom, which was described for years as the hardest nuclear target on the planet. Fordo's halls are believed to sit about 80 to 90 meters down. Pickaxe Mountain, by most estimates, is deeper. And it is not only deep. Over time, the images showed a security perimeter taking shape around the whole site. Earth berms, fences, guard positions, support buildings, roads linking the complex back toward the Natanz enrichment plant. This was not a mining project and not a civilian tunnel. The location, the security, and the connection to an existing nuclear site all pointed the same way. So why would a country spend that much money and that many years hollowing out a mountain? To understand it, you have to understand what the previous 15 years felt like from inside Iran's nuclear program. If you had been an engineer there, you would have concluded that the surface of the Earth was simply not a safe place to work. Start with Stuxnet. Around 2009 and 2010, a computer worm, widely reported to be an American and Israeli creation, slipped into the control systems at Natanz. It did not blow anything up. It did something more humiliating. It ordered the centrifuges to spin themselves apart while feeding the operators calm, normal readings. Iranian technicians watched healthy numbers while their machines tore themselves apart. Around 1,000 centrifuges were reportedly lost. The lesson landed hard. Your enemy may already be inside your network. Then, July 2020, a building at Natanz, the centrifuge assembly center where new machines were put together, exploded. Iran played it down at first, then admitted serious damage. Satellite pictures showed the roof torn open and the inside gutted. This was the workshop that produced the next generation of centrifuges. Losing it was like losing the factory, not just the product. Iran called it sabotage. Then April 2021, an explosion knocked out the power distribution system at Natanz. The blackout reportedly wrecked thousands of centrifuges in seconds, because when the electricity dies suddenly, Rotors spinning at supersonic tip speed do not stop politely. They wobble and shatter. Again, sabotage. Again, Iran's most protected industrial site had been reached from the inside. And then there were the people. In November 2020, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, long described by Israel as the father of Iran's weapons research, was killed on a road outside Tehran. Reports described a remotely operated weapon system that fired without a single attacker standing there. Other Iranian nuclear scientists had already been shot or bombed over the years. The message was impossible to miss. We can reach your machines, your buildings, and your men. Now stand in the shoes of Iran's leadership after all of that. Infiltrated digitally, sabotaged physically, decapitated personally. Every building above ground is a target, and every roof is an invitation. So you do the only thing that feels logical. You stop building upward and you start digging downward. You take your most sensitive work and bury it under so much rock that no bomb and no saboteur can erase years of progress in one night. Iranian officials barely hid the reasoning. After the 2020 sabotage, Behrouz Kamalvandi, spokesman for Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, said publicly that the damaged facility would be rebuilt inside a mountain, more secure than before. The message was almost a taunt. Destroy what sits on the surface and we will rebuild where you cannot follow. Pickaxe Mountain is that promise turned into rock and concrete. Which brings us to the weapon at the center of this whole argument. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, usually just called the MOP. It exists for one purpose, to kill things hidden under rock and concrete. It weighs about 30,000 pounds, and most of that weight is hardened steel casing. The bomb is not designed to explode on impact. It is designed to survive impact, punch through, and detonate deep inside. Public estimates suggest the MOP can chew through roughly 60 meters of earth, or about 20 meters of reinforced concrete. For a conventional weapon, that is astonishing. But hold those numbers next to a facility sitting 80 to 100 meters under solid rock, and the problem is obvious. One bomb does not get there. Militaries have a workaround, and it is as blunt as it sounds. You drop them in sequence. The first bomb cracks the rock and opens a crater. The second flies into the same hole and goes deeper. The third goes deeper again. It is drilling with explosives, but it demands extreme precision, repeated passes over defended airspace, and a confident guess about where the halls sit. Miss by 100 meters and you have spent millions rearranging a hillside. There is another catch. Only one aircraft in the world carries this bomb, the American B-2 Spirit, and it carries 2 at a time. There are around 19 of them in existence. So every strike on a deeply buried target becomes a national operation with tankers, escorts, and flights lasting more than a day. Nobody else on the planet can do it. Pause for 1 second, because this is the halfway mark and I want to try something. If you have made it this far, you already understand this better than most people reporting on it. So prove it. Leave the word mountain in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so you catch the follow-up when the next satellite images arrive. Now let us talk about the part that genuinely frightens the experts. Nobody's allowed inside. Under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran is supposed to let the International Atomic Energy Agency verify that nuclear material is not being diverted to weapons. There is a specific rule, known as Modified Code 3.1, which says a country must tell the agency as soon as it decides to build a nuclear facility, not after it is finished. Iran accepted that rule in 2003. In 2007, it announced it was going back to the older, weaker version, which only required notice about 6 months before nuclear material arrived. The agency's position is simple. You cannot cancel a safeguards commitment on your own. Iran's position is equally simple. We can, we did, and a tunnel with no nuclear material inside is not your business. That is a legal fight, and legal fights can last forever. Underneath it sits a very practical fact. The world's nuclear watchdog has never walked into Pickaxe Mountain, has never seen the layout, and cannot say what equipment is being installed. Rafael Grossi, the agency's Director General, has said again and again that his questions are not being answered, and that he cannot certify the program is peaceful while those gaps remain. And the gaps grew. In 2022, Iran removed a number of monitoring cameras installed under the nuclear deal. In 2023 and 2024, it withdrew the accreditation of several experienced inspectors, blocking the very people who knew the program best. Each move was explained as a response to political pressure. Each move had the same effect: fewer eyes, less data, more darkness. Inspectors have a phrase for what this destroys: continuity of knowledge. It means knowing not just what exists today, but being able to trace where every gram came from and where it went. Once that chain snaps, a fresh snapshot cannot repair it. Even if inspectors walked in tomorrow, they could not reconstruct the blind period. That is why a sealed mountain becomes so explosive politically. It is not proof of a bomb. It is the absence of proof of anything. Meanwhile, the stockpile kept growing. The agency reported that Iran had built up well over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. That figure should stop you, because 60% has no believable civilian use. Power reactors run on fuel enriched to 3 to 5%. Research reactors might use up to 20%. There's no ordinary reason on Earth to sit on hundreds of kilograms at 60. Here is the part most people misunderstand. Enrichment is not a straight line. The hardest work happens at the start. Getting natural uranium up to 20% eats most of the effort. Going from 20 to 60 is faster. Going from 60 to 90, which is weapons grade, is comparatively quick. That is why analysts said Iran's stockpile represented enough material, if enriched further, for around 10 nuclear weapons. That collapsed the one idea everyone used to lean on: breakout time. Under the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran's stockpile and centrifuges were capped so that any race toward a bomb would give the world about 12 months of warning. 12 months is generous. It is enough time for diplomacy, sanctions, coalitions, and, if necessary, military planning. By 2025, credible estimates of Iran's breakout, time for a single weapon's worth of material, had fallen to days or a couple of weeks. Days. That is the context you need for what happened in June 2025. On the 13th of June, Israel launched a large air campaign against Iran. It hit nuclear infrastructure, missile production, air defenses, and command targets. Senior commanders were killed in the opening hours. Nuclear scientists were killed. Iranian air defenses collapsed so fast that Israeli aircraft were soon flying over Iran with little resistance. Iran hit back with waves of ballistic missiles and drones aimed at Israeli cities. Buildings were struck. People died on both sides. For 12 days, the region held its breath. Then, on the 22nd of June, it escalated in exactly the way Tehran had always feared. The United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer. B-2 bombers flew from Missouri, refueled again and again across the world, and dropped 14 massive ordnance penetrators on Iran's deepest enrichment sites, most of them at Fordo. Submarine-launched cruise missiles struck facilities near Isfahan. It was the first time in history that the MOP had been used in combat. What followed was a war of narratives. The American president said the sites had been completely obliterated. Within days, a leaked mines of Manushed. Early assessment attributed to the Defense Intelligence Agency suggested the strikes had set the program back by months, not destroyed it. The administration pushed back hard. The IAEA said the damage at Fordo was severe. Independent analysts studying the imagery saw collapsed tunnel entrances, cratering and disturbed earth, but they could not confirm the state of the halls hundreds of feet below. But here is the detail that mattered most, and it got far less attention than it deserved. As far as public reporting and satellite analysis have shown, Pickaxe Mountain was not struck. The most protected, most mysterious, most inaccessible nuclear-linked site in Iran sat untouched while bombs fell around it. Maybe it was not ready. Maybe nobody could confirm nuclear material inside. Maybe it simply could not be reliably destroyed. The result was the same. The deepest hole in Iran came through the war intact. And then there is the uranium. In the days before the American strike, satellites captured cargo trucks lined up along the access road at Fordo. Analysts openly wondered whether Iran had moved something out. Iranian officials made vague comments about protective measures. The IAEA later said it had lost track of the highly enriched uranium and could not verify where it was, which gives us the most uncomfortable sentence in modern nuclear security. Nobody outside Iran can say with confidence where 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium is sitting tonight. After the ceasefire, Iran did not return to cooperation. In July 2025, its parliament passed a law suspending cooperation with the IAEA and tying any future inspection to approval from the Supreme National Security Council. Inspectors largely left. Limited access to some sites was negotiated later, but the full monitoring system never came back. The blindfold, already tight, was pulled tighter. Then the diplomatic floor gave way. In late September 2025, the United Nations sanctions lifted under the 2015 deal snapped back into place after the European powers triggered the mechanism. Arms restrictions, missile restrictions, and asset freezes returned. Iran called it illegal. 10 years of painstaking diplomacy were formally declared dead, and the satellites went back to watching the mountain. They did not see abandonment. They saw work, construction vehicles, activity around the tunnel entrances, new security fencing, a perimeter being strengthened. After the most intense attack its nuclear program had ever suffered, Iran's answer was to keep digging. So, why do I say the gamble backfired? Because on almost every level except the pure engineering one, Pickaxe Mountain has cost Iran more than it has bought. And the first reason is the one that gets missed. Secrecy that cannot be verified is not protection. It is an accusation you can never answer. When you build a facility so deep that only a weapons program would need that much protection and then refuse to let anyone see inside, you have written your enemy's intelligence assessment for them. They no longer have to prove you are building a bomb. You have removed your own ability to prove you are not. In a world where governments plan for worst cases, a sealed mountain becomes a weapons site in every threat briefing. Quick thought before the next part, and this one is genuine. Channels like this survive on sharing, not luck. If this video has made a complicated story clear, send it to one person who argues about this without the facts. That single share does more than 100 passive views. Like it, subscribe, and stay with me, because the next few reasons are the ones that turn this from a construction story into a warning. The second reason is timing. Deep burial is supposed to create deterrence through invulnerability. If you cannot be destroyed, nobody bothers trying. But that logic carries a trap inside it. If your opponent believes you are close to becoming untouchable, their incentive is not to give up. Their incentive is to act now before the window shuts. Strategists call it the use it or lose it problem. Pickaxe Mountain did not prevent an attack. It arguably put a clock on one. The third reason is the road not taken. There was a version of this story where Iran kept a capped program, sold its oil freely, and rebuilt its economy. That version needed trust, and trust needed transparency. Every undeclared tunnel, every removed camera, every blocked inspector chipped away at the claim that this was a normal program. By the time the bombers came, Tehran had very few defenders left in the room. Even governments sympathetic to Iran's grievances struggled to explain the mountain. The fourth reason is one military planners talk about quietly. Depth is also a weakness. A facility under 100 meters of rock has only a handful of ways in and out. Air has to get in. Power has to get in. People and equipment have to move through a few tunnel mouths. You do not always need to destroy the halls to destroy the function. Collapse the entrances, cut the power, wreck the ventilation shafts, and the fortress becomes a tomb full of machinery nobody can reach. Reporting on the Fordo strikes described exactly that kind of entrance and shaft damage. The fifth reason is the price, and it is paid by ordinary people. Iran is not a rich country right now. The currency has been battered. Inflation has crushed household budgets. There have been electricity shortages, winter gas shortages, and one of the worst water crises in the country's modern history. Against that background, the state poured enormous sums into excavating rock for a program that delivered sanctions, isolation, and bombs. For millions of Iranians, the mountain is not a symbol of strength. It is a symbol of priorities. And then there is the weakness concrete cannot fix: people. Iran's nuclear program has been penetrated again and again. Israeli agents reportedly walked out of a Tehran warehouse with an archive of nuclear documents in 2018. Scientists have been killed in their cars and outside their homes. In the 2025 campaign, senior commanders were found and struck within minutes of each other, which does not happen without deep intelligence. You can bury a centrifuge under a mountain. You cannot bury the engineer who maintains it. He still drives to work in the morning. The same is true of cyber. Stuxnet proved that an isolated facility deep underground can still be reached through a contractor's laptop or an infected drive. Depth defends against explosives. It does nothing against code and nothing against a recruited insider. The harder Iran makes the physical problem, the more its enemies invest in the human and digital ones. Which leaves the question this entire story turns on. What is Pickaxe Mountain actually for? There are two believable answers, and they lead to very different futures. The first is that it is a survival vault, a place to store centrifuges, assemble machines, and protect the industrial backbone of the program, so no single strike can erase decades of work. Under that reading, Iran is not racing for a bomb. It is building permanence. It wants to be a threshold state, close enough to a weapon that nobody dares invade, but never crossing the line. The second answer is simpler and darker. It is the place you go when you decide to actually build one. A facility invisible to inspectors, resistant to bombs, and connected to the enrichment infrastructure next door is precisely what a weapons dash would need. With the agency locked out and hundreds of kilograms of 60% uranium unaccounted for, nobody can rule that out. Iran's leaders have studied two very different examples. Libya's Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program in exchange for acceptance, and 8 years later he was dead in a ditch. North Korea kept going, tested a device, and today nobody seriously discusses invading Pyongyang. If you are sitting in Tehran running that cold calculation, it is not hard to see which lesson feels more persuasive. That is the tragedy here. The strikes may have delayed the program. They may also have convinced a generation of Iranian planners that the only real mistake was not finishing sooner. But here is the counterweight, and it is why backfired is still the right word. Iran learned something in June 2025 that it did not know before. It learned its air defenses could be dismantled. It learned its most senior commanders could be found. It learned that Washington would use the largest bomb in its arsenal. And it learned that a mountain is only safe until somebody decides it is not. The Deterrent Iran spent 15 years building did not deter the one thing it was built to deter. So today, the mountain sits there in the desert, quiet, with trucks moving near its entrances and satellites passing overhead every few hours. It is the most photographed secret in the world. We can measure its spoil piles by the cubic meter and count the vehicles at its gate, and we still have no idea what is happening far below. That is the strangest part of this story. We have never been able to see so much and know so little. And that is the real danger. Not the bomb, not yet. The blindness. Wars rarely start because leaders know too much. They start because leaders know too little and assume the worst. Every month, inspectors stay locked out, the guesswork gets more aggressive, and the margin for error gets thinner. Somewhere, right now, someone is drawing a red line on a map based on a photograph of a hillside. Iran wanted a place nothing could reach. What it built instead was a place nobody can verify. And in the nuclear age, an unverifiable secret is not a shield. It is a fuse. The mountain is still standing. The uranium is still missing. The inspectors are still outside. And the next chapter of this story will not be written by diplomats in Vienna or generals in Washington. It will be written under 100 meters of rock, in the dark, by people we will never see. The question is not whether Pickaxe Mountain can survive a bomb. It probably can. The question is whether the rest of us can survive not knowing what is inside it.